It's his birthday today. I didn't realize that. This morning I got up and I was like, I'm gonna make a video about Pete Townshend today. I was looking online for information about him, and it was like, yeah, today, 75 years ago, Pete Townshend was born today on May 19th. And I was like, what? 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 So that's kind of a fluke.
That's great.
Because musicians are stupid.
I think Pete Townshend is probably the greatest guitar player of all time. I really got into Pete when I was like 24, back in 2013, 25. I was dating a guy that looked just like him and was very much like Pete is. He was an artist. He was a player. Pete was a player when he was younger. And that same year, his book, Who Are You, came out, or Who I Am came out. And I read it, and I just devoured it. Parts of it are pretty boring because there are parts of it that are about the sound equipment that he used. But a lot of it is about the sex, drugs, and rock and roll part of his life, which I find fascinating. So if you haven't read that book and you like Pete, check it out, because it's really good. So I was introduced to The Who through my father when I was probably 13 or 12 years old. He gave us the album Quadrophenia and said, go up to your room and listen to this. We were up there for about a half hour. We came out, stood on the balcony, and went, Dad, we don't think we're ready for this quite yet. And then about a year later, he gave it to us again, and we went upstairs and listened to it. We're like, holy crap, this is amazing! I really loved Quadrophenia growing up because I was bullied. So I could really relate to, you know, the Pete writing about being an outsider and being an outcast. So that's why I really liked that. I actually like Quadrophenia way more than I like Tommy. Tommy is brilliant. The fact that Pete wrote that... Pete was... I actually wrote down a couple of facts here. Pete was 22 when the album My Generation came out. It was 1966.
What's your name?
Pete.
Pete
Townshend, yeah.
He was 25 when The Who's Tommy came out. Meaning that he probably wrote it when he was 24. And Quadrophenia came out when he was 29 in 1973. He was 29 years old. When I was really getting into Pete, I watched every single thing that I could find of him online. I watched every interview, I watched every solo show that he did, I watched every, demo that he did, everything. His solo work is actually really spectacular. He's got an incredible voice. His voice is very different from Roger's. He almost has, from Roger Daltrey. Roger's voice is very screamy and raw. And Pete's voice is very almost youthful and childlike and sweet. There's a kind of childlike sweetness in his voice that Roger doesn't have. So when you hear Pete singing the songs that he wrote and playing them, it's pretty incredible. The fact that he was 25 years old when he did that is just mind-blowing to me. Absolutely mind-blowing. Pete's playing is consistently amazing. His use of feedback and the fact that he he specifically said in interviews in the past that he wasn't trying to make beautiful music. He was trying to confront his audience with the realities of life. The fact that that an airplane could literally come over them with a bomb and obliterate them. And he said somewhere in one interview that, you know, when he was playing, he would use the guitar as a gun and be like shooting his audience. He also said some other time that when he was growing up, he really, really wanted to kill Nazis because he was born 10 days after the Nazis surrendered to the Allies. So he grew up in post-World War London. So his, you know, and that's what rock and roll music came out of. Rock and roll music came out of the war. And was, you know, of course it was a way for kids to rebel against their parents. So there's a lot of reasons why I really like Pete. I like him because he seems like he doesn't give a shit about what anybody thinks about him. He doesn't bullshit you. He's not egotistical. When he was on stage, he took the stage. He was not afraid to be himself and to fuck around and to have fun and be completely insane. But to me, it didn't seem like he was doing it to get attention. He was just doing, even though that sounds really weird, it feels like to me he wasn't doing it to get attention. It feels like to me that he was doing it to express himself. And there's a lot of interviews that I've listened to and watched in which he says, you know, if somebody interrupted me in the middle of a show, I would probably kill them. And he actually almost killed somebody that came on stage once. I think he was actually a policeman. There's a really beautiful lyric in Cut My Hair. Pete writes, "Why should I care if I have to cut my hair? I gotta move with the fashion or be outcast." That's definitely hardcore relatable for me. In high school and in school in general, you've got to do certain things in order to fit in. And so that's another reason I really like Pete, is that the stuff that he wrote about was very, very, very relatable for me growing up. Pete said, "I wasn't trying to play beautiful music. I was confronting my audience with the awful, visceral sound of what we all knew was the single absolute of our frail existence. One day an airplane would carry the bomb that would destroy us all in a flash. It could happen anytime."
And recently I realised that Behind Blue Eyes is a song about the sadness and the badness, if you like, the war that has been going on on our continent for a long, long time and continues to go on. You know, when you settle one, another one starts, and in the past, you know, couple of years we've seen, you know, conflict. I thought, God, this song is about, you know, it's about Germany, it's about fascism, it's about, you know, it's about all kinds of things that it shouldn't really be about. You know, this is the closest to a love song that I've ever written and managed to get The Who to perform, and suddenly I realised that it's actually a social document of great significance.
So Pete was born to Cliff and Betty Townshend, both of whom were musicians as well, on May 19th, 1945. His dad was a professional alto saxophone player in the Royal Air Force's dance band, and his mom was a professional singer with the Sydney Torch and Les Douglas's orchestras. His parents split when he was still a toddler. They didn't divorce, they split. And Pete was sent to live with his maternal grandmother, whom he later described as clinically insane. Pete later met his bandmate John Entwistle in high school. Pete attended art school in 1961, where he was exposed to autodestructive art pioneer Gustav Medeger. which later influenced his kind of manifesto as an artist of, using destruction as a way to express oneself. Pete dropped out of school in 1964 to pursue his musical career full-time. The band's most famous, earliest performance together was at the Railway Tavern, where Pete accidentally broke the head off of his guitar and then proceeded to destroy it entirely. Pete talks about this in an interview in Storytellers, which I love.
It was very, very low ceiling, which is why I broke the guitar. And I was on the stage and going banging away, and it clipped and it went through the roof. And when I pulled it out, it was a Rickenbacker, and they're quite thin there, and quite, not that they're badly made, but they're quite thin there, and the neck came off, the head came off. And a lot of people from my class at art college kind of sitting there kind of going. So I went, yeah, and then and smashed it to pieces and finished it off. Looked at them and went.
This became a ginormous part of their shows. He was 25 in 1969 when Tommy came out, and when he was at Woodstock, in which he did one of, if not the best guitar solos that's ever been done, in my opinion. Pete's solo at the end of Woodstock, at the end of their gig at Woodstock, is incredible. His use of his solo is probably less than a minute long, and it's so beautiful, and it's beautiful. It's really, truly, in my opinion, it's very, very beautiful. But I'm sure that Pete didn't mean it to be beautiful. You can tell that while he's playing that he's really experimenting with how to use his guitar in a creative way. How to use his guitar in a different way that can create a different kind of sound. How he's experimenting with feedback in a way that nobody else had before. And using the quasi-destruction of his guitar to make a statement and to create something beautiful. So I had been listening to The Who for many years before I actually knew who Pete Townshend was. I'd seen Tommy, and I'd listened to Quadrophenia, and I had no idea who Pete Townshend was. My dad had told me about Pete Townshend, but I was a kid. I was 12 years old. I was 13, 14 years old, so I didn't really pay any attention. And it was only later, when I watched Tommy for the 50 billionth time, that I realized, oh my god, that's Pete Townshend. But I didn't know that was him. And it kind of changed my perspective on these songs once I realized that it was Pete that was singing, because his voice is so different from Roger's. His voice is so much more gentle and sweet. And not that Roger's voice is bad. Roger has an incredible voice. The fact that he can sustain the kind of notes that he can sustain and scream, and that he could still fucking do it. Like when I saw him when I saw them a couple of years ago, they were both incredible. They were incredible, and Roger still screamed, and he still did it like he was 20 years old. But the fact that Roger and John and Keith and Pete were so young when they had all this success is just mind-blowing to me, because I don't know what the fuck I was doing in my early 20s. I was finishing college. All these boys just kind of took a chance and went out and did this, created one of the best bands that's ever been in existence, in my opinion. But if you haven't done a lot of research into Pete, you should, because he's the best. And he's really funny, too.
When I went to get my ears tested, I thought it was really encouraging, apart from the fact he said I had
Terrible.
Like terrible ears. He said, Bill said to him, well, what advice would you give him? Would you tell him to stop playing entirely and leave the group?
Oh, throw his career out the
Throw
window.
his career out the window? Become a pauper? Starve? Would you tell him that? Well, no, actually, no. But I would advise him to learn to lip read.
I love Pete. I love him so much. His music is so unique, and his use of synthesizers, and his stage presence, the antics that he pulled on stage, the show that he puts on is just brilliant, and he's incredibly unique. There's nobody else like him. He came up with a lot of stuff for the first time. If you haven't listened to Lifehouse, that's a really good rock opera that he wrote later. There actually used to be a video of it on YouTube, but I think it was taken off in the recent years. But that was kind of a project that he took on after Tommy or something like that. It's good stuff. Anyway. That's really all I have to say. See you next week. Bye. GoPro, stop recording.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Who.